When I boarded that flight back to Chicago, I had no idea that grabbing the wrong black suitcase would completely upend my life. Inside that bag wasn't just expensive clothes and gadgets. I found his secrets, his vulnerabilities, all neatly contained in a leather-bound journal. And he found mine, the business plan I'd poured my heart and soul into, my ticket out of working for others and into owning my own luxury real estate agency. That accidental luggage swap with Theo Miller, the reclusive tech millionaire everyone whispered about but few actually knew, intertwined our fates in ways I never could have imagined. One minute we're arranging to exchange our belongings. The next he's offering to invest in my dream, the very dream my ex-boyfriend Ethan had once used to destroy my reputation in Atlanta. I told myself to keep my guard up. No business with pleasure. No trusting powerful men with access to my ideas. But something about Theo was different, and just as I started to believe that, photos of us surfaced online with vicious captions, investors pulled out, and suddenly I was watching my career implode for the second time. What I didn't know then was that our enemies had joined forces. My vindictive ex and Theo's corporate rival were working together, using our swapped luggage as the perfect opportunity to destroy us both. Now our lives are dangerously intertwined, and I have to decide if I can trust Theo enough to fight back or if I'm just repeating the worst mistake of my life. Buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. I was bone-tired when I dragged myself through O'Hare that evening, my mind still swimming with luxury property specs and investment pitches from the New York conference. The airport terminal swayed slightly under my designer heels. 36 hours with barely 4 hours of sleep will do that to you. I just wanted to grab my luggage, hail a rideshare, and collapse into my apartment. The black suitcase circled the carousel, identical to dozens of others. I checked the plain luggage tag, black like the bag itself, and yanked it from the belt. Something felt off about the weight, but I dismissed it. Conference materials can shift during flight, and frankly, I wasn't operating at full mental capacity. The rideshare dropped me at my high-rise, and I tipped generously despite my exhaustion. My mother always said how you treat service workers reveals your character. I managed to smile for the doorman despite my fatigue, then rode the elevator to my 12th floor apartment. Inside, I kicked off my heels first thing, wiggling my toes against the cool hardwood. My place wasn't huge, but it was mine. All clean lines, white furniture, and touches of teal. I'd built this life from scratch after fleeing Atlanta 5 years ago, leaving behind the wreckage of a relationship and career that had imploded spectacularly. I rolled the suitcase to my bedroom and hoisted it onto the bed, eager to retrieve my business plan. Tomorrow I had a preliminary meeting with potential investors, and I needed to review my projections one more time. When the zipper glided open, I froze. These weren't my clothes. Instead of my neatly packed blouses and presentation materials, I found meticulously folded men's dress shirts, not department store brands, but the kind with hand-stitched monograms and fabric that probably cost more per yard than my monthly parking fee. Beneath them lay what appeared to be some sort of technological prototype in a specialized case, and beside that, a leather-bound journal. "You have got to be kidding me," I murmured, frantically checking the luggage tag again. It read simply, "TM I'd taken someone else's bag," which meant someone else had mine, including my entire business plan for Apex Luxury Properties, the independent agency I'd been working toward launching for 2 years. All my financial projections, market analyses, property acquisition strategies, even the confidential list of clients I hoped to bring with me. My stomach dropped. After what happened in Atlanta with Ethan, I was paranoid about my ideas being stolen. He'd sweet-talked me into sharing my business strategies, then used them himself while smearing my reputation so thoroughly I'd had to leave the state. Taking a deep breath, I assessed my options. I needed to report the mix-up, but it was nearly midnight. The airline's lost luggage office would be minimally staffed, if at all, and the process could take days I didn't have. My presentation materials were irreplaceable on such short notice. I glanced at the belongings again, looking for more identifying information. The clothing tags bore high-end designer names, but nothing personally identifying. The tech device was sleek, unmarked, and locked in its specialized case. That left the journal. I hesitated, my fingertips hovering above the soft leather cover. Reading someone's private thoughts felt invasive, but I needed to find the owner quickly. Maybe there was contact information inside. I opened to the first page, which contained only the initials TM again in elegant handwriting. Flipping further, I found what appeared to be business notes and personal reflections. The writing was precise, intelligent, and surprisingly vulnerable in places. A passage caught my eye. The board continues pushing for more public engagements. They don't understand that innovation doesn't flourish under constant scrutiny. The accusations last year nearly destroyed everything I've built. Until the new security protocols are implemented, staying out of the spotlight is the only logical choice. With growing unease, I realized whose bag I might have. Theo Miller, the reclusive tech genius behind Quantum Sphere Technologies, a company valued at billions despite its founder's increasingly private nature. The business pages had been speculating about his withdrawal from public life for months, especially after vague corporate espionage allegations that were never quite explained in the press. And I had his private journal and what looked like a prototype of something valuable enough to have specialized casing. I quickly closed the journal, suddenly aware of the potential seriousness of the situation. I needed to return this bag immediately, but how would I contact someone famously elusive? My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. Unknown number. I almost declined it, then thought better. If someone had my bag, they might be trying to reach me. I answered cautiously. Hello? Is this Olivia James? The male voice was composed, direct, with an undercurrent of authority. Yes, who's calling? My name is Theo Miller. I believe you have my luggage and I have yours. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. I just realized the mix-up. No need for apologies. These things happen. His voice had a measured quality that suggested careful control. However, I'd like to arrange an exchange as soon as possible. I have some rather valuable items in that bag. Of course, I said quickly. I have an important presentation tomorrow and my materials are in my suitcase. Tomorrow morning, then. There's a cafe called Meridian on Michigan Avenue, 8 a.m. I'll be there, I promised, relieved at his reasonable response. After hanging up, I paced my apartment. Meeting Theo Miller, even briefly for a luggage exchange, was intimidating. I'd researched his company for a tech executive client last year. The man was brilliant, wealthy, and recently mysterious. The business world buzzed with theories about his retreat from public life after building one of the most innovative companies in Chicago. And now he had my business plan. A chill ran through me. Would he have looked through my things as I had his? The thought made me deeply uneasy. I'd worked too hard rebuilding my career to have my ideas compromised again. I arrived at Meridian Cafe 20 minutes early, scanning the upscale establishment for a quiet corner table. The morning clientele consisted mainly of business people engrossed in laptops or quiet conversations, the gentle clinking of espresso cups punctuating the ambient music. I claimed a table near the back with clear sight of the entrance, setting Theo Miller's suitcase beside me. Sleep had evaded me most of the night as I rehearsed what to say. I'd barely managed to reschedule my investor meeting, buying myself 48 hours to prepare. My entire career trajectory hinged on making this agency happen, and I couldn't afford any missteps. At precisely 8 a.m., a man entered the cafe. Even without the photos I'd quickly researched last night, I would have known it was Theo Miller. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his worth, his tailored charcoal suit fitting perfectly across broad shoulders. His appearance surprised me. The media painted him as a disheveled tech genius, but the man approaching my table was impeccably put together, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I stood, extending my hand professionally. Mr. Miller, Olivia James. His handshake was firm, his expression measured as he studied me. Miss James, Thank you for coming. Your luggage, I gestured to the black suitcase beside me. I apologize again for the mix-up. He nodded, setting my identical suitcase on the floor beside the table. These things happen, though I admit finding women's clothing in my bag was unexpected. I felt heat creep into my cheeks, thinking of my personal items in his possession overnight. I imagined so. Would you like coffee before we part ways? I've already ordered for myself. He gestured to the seat across from him. The invitation surprised me. My instinct was to politely decline, retrieve my suitcase, and leave. But something about his direct gaze made me curious. Just for a few minutes, I agreed, settling back into my chair. A server appeared almost immediately. I ordered black coffee and Theo requested an espresso. When she departed, an awkward silence fell between us. I couldn't help noticing your business plan, he said finally. Very comprehensive. My stomach tightened. You read it? I was looking for identification to return the bag, he explained, his tone neutral. Once I realized what it was, professional curiosity took over. I hope you don't mind. I minded very much, but kept my expression pleasant. It's a private venture I've been developing. An independent luxury real estate agency focusing on unique historical properties and ultra-modern spaces. Your market analysis was particularly astute. His detailed recall confirmed he'd read my entire plan thoroughly. I fought to keep my expression neutral while alarm bells rang in my head. This was exactly how things started with Ethan, professional interest in my business acumen, followed by theft of my ideas. Thank you, I said carefully. I've been in luxury real estate for 8 years. The Chicago market has specific needs that larger agencies often overlook. Your financial projections were conservative, yet realistic. That's uncommon in business proposals. Most entrepreneurs overestimate potential returns to attract investors. The server returned with our coffees, providing a momentary reprieve from his scrutiny. I stirred my coffee slowly, considering my response. I prefer to under-promise and over-deliver, Mr. Miller. Inflated projections might attract initial investment, but they destroy long-term credibility. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps. A philosophy I share. He took a sip of his espresso. Are you seeking investors for this venture? I have meetings scheduled this week, I admitted, wondering why I was sharing this information with a stranger. I'd like to be one of them. I nearly choked on my coffee. Excuse me? I'm interested in investing in your agency. Your business model is solid and your approach shows integrity. I studied him, looking for the catch. With all due respect, Mr. Miller, real estate is quite different from technology. Diversification is essential in investment, but more importantly, I recognize vision when I see it. He withdrew a business card, sliding it across the table. Consider it. We could discuss terms at your convenience. Before I could respond, he glanced toward the cafe windows and stiffened almost imperceptibly. I followed his gaze and noticed someone quickly turning away. Had they been photographing us? Is something wrong? I asked. Possibly, he said, his voice lower. I apologize for the abruptness, but I should go. There are people who take unhealthy interest in my business dealings. The corporate espionage allegations, I said without thinking, then wished I hadn't revealed my knowledge of his personal history. His eyes narrowed slightly. You've done your research. I read the business pages. Then you know why I'm cautious. He stood, checking his watch. Think about my offer, Ms. James. Call the private number on that card when you've decided. He collected his suitcase, then hesitated. One more thing. There's a leather journal in that bag. It contains some personal reflections. I'd appreciate your discretion. Heat flooded my face. I only opened it looking for contact information. His expression softened slightly. I'm not accusing you of anything, merely requesting professional courtesy. With that, he was gone, leaving me staring at his business card. Heavy stock, minimalist design with a handwritten number on the back. I remained at the table long after he'd left, turning over our strange encounter in my mind. Theo Miller wanted to invest in my business based on a plan he'd accidentally intercepted. The opportunity was incredible, potentially life-changing, yet all I could think about was Ethan's voice. "Liv, your ideas are brilliant. We should partner up. Trust me, I'll make it happen for both of us." 6 months later, I discovered he'd been using my strategies while systematically undermining my reputation with clients, positioning himself to open the exact agency I'd envisioned, without me. I couldn't make the same mistake twice, no matter how compelling the offer. But as I gathered my suitcase and prepared to leave, I found myself slipping Theo Miller's business card into my wallet instead of the trash. 3 days passed before I called the number on Theo Miller's card. 3 days of internal debates, sleepless nights, and discussions with my best friend and fellow agent, Zoe. "Are you insane?" Zoe had demanded when I told her about Theo's offer. We were having lunch in a small bistro near our office, and she'd nearly spat out her water. "Theo Miller wants to invest in your agency, and you're hesitating? The man is worth billions." "That's exactly why I'm hesitating," I'd countered, picking at my salad. "Powerful men with money have agendas, Zoe. Remember what happened in Atlanta?" Setso, her expression had softened. Ethan was a manipulative jerk with a regional real estate license. Theo Miller revolutionized quantum computing, not exactly the same caliber. "Power is power," I'd insisted, and I worked too hard rebuilding my reputation to risk it all again. But after my rescheduled investor meeting fell through, the third such disappointment in 2 months, I found myself dialing Theo's number on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. He answered on the second ring, "Olivia James." I was beginning to think you wouldn't call. His directness caught me off guard. "I've been considering your offer," I said, keeping my tone businesslike. "I'd like to discuss it further before making any decisions." "Understandable. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? My office at Quantum Sphere? 3 o'clock? I hesitated, calculating the impression it would make meeting him on his territory. "Actually, I'd prefer somewhere neutral. There's a business center at the Wellington Hotel with private meeting rooms." A brief pause. "The Wellington at 3, then. I'll arrange for a room." When I arrived the next day, the concierge directed me to a sleek conference room overlooking the Chicago River. Theo was already there, reviewing documents at the head of the table. He stood as I entered. "Ms. James, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. Today he wore a navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "Mr. Miller." I set my portfolio on the table, determined to maintain professional boundaries. "Please call me Theo." He gestured to the chair beside him, rather than across the table. A subtle power move I recognized immediately. I chose a seat 1 chair away instead. "Then I'm Olivia." A slight smile touched his lips, acknowledging my counter. We were negotiating already. For the next hour, we discussed my business plan in detail. I was prepared for superficial interest or attempts to redirect my vision, but Theo's questions were incisive and thoughtful. He challenged assumptions I hadn't fully explored and offered perspectives I hadn't considered. "Your focus on historical properties with modern renovations is particularly interesting," he noted, reviewing my target portfolio. "Chicago has untapped potential in that niche." "It's underserved," I agreed. "The major agencies focus on either pure luxury modern or pure historical preservation. The intersection attracts a specific client base willing to pay premium prices for the right property." "Speaking of locations," Theo said, sliding a folder across the table, "I think you should look at this." Inside was information about a street-level office space in the historic Marshall Building, exactly the kind of prestigious downtown location I dreamed of but couldn't possibly afford in my first year. The current tenant is one of my subsidiaries. Their lease expires next month, and they're moving to our main campus. The space could be available to Apex Luxury Properties at significantly below market rate for the first 2 years. I looked up sharply. "Why would you do that?" Because location matters in luxury real estate, and this one communicates exactly what your brand promises: historical elegance with modern functionality. His gaze met mine steadily. And because I believe in your vision. His words echoed dangerously close to Ethan's old promises. I closed the folder, centering myself. What exactly are you looking for in return, Theo? Equity? Control of operations? Specific ROI timeline? 20% equity, non-controlling interest, advisory capacity only, 5-year expected return timeline. He delivered the terms without hesitation. I'm not interested in running a real estate agency, Olivia. I'm interested in supporting businesses with potential for excellence. The terms were surprisingly reasonable, almost too good to be true. We spent another hour hammering out details, and by the end, I found myself warming to the idea despite my reservations. I'll have my lawyer review everything before making any commitments, I said as we wrapped up. I'd be concerned if you didn't. He gathered his documents, then paused. I have dinner plans tonight, but perhaps we could continue this discussion tomorrow. There's an industry event at the Art Institute I'm obligated to attend. You'd be welcome to join as my guest. Good networking opportunity. The invitation blurred the line between professional and personal in a way that made me uneasy. I appreciate the offer, but I have prior commitments. It wasn't entirely true, but maintaining boundaries seemed crucial. Theo accepted my declination with grace, and we parted ways with arrangements to reconnect the following week. On my way home, Zoe called. Well, did Tech Genius Boy shower you with investor gold? The terms are good, I admitted, almost suspiciously good. Or maybe he's legitimately impressed by your business plan, she countered. Not everyone is Ethan Callaway, Liv.
I know that logically, but emotionally, I sighed, watching raindrops trace patterns on the cab window. Trust doesn't come easily anymore. So what are you going to do? I thought about the Marshall Building office space, the perfect location I could never afford on my own. About the incisive questions Theo had asked that strengthened my business model, about the way he'd listened when I spoke, really listened. I'm going to proceed cautiously, I decided. But I think I'm going to proceed. What I didn't tell Zoe was how, despite all my defenses, something about Theo Miller intrigued me on a level that had nothing to do with business. And that scared me more than any investment deal ever could. 2 weeks after our first meeting, I found myself working late in the office space Theo had arranged for Apex Luxury Properties. The papers were signed, the investment secured, and renovation was underway to transform the already beautiful Marshall Building space into my vision. My lawyer had scrutinized every clause of Theo's offer and found it surprisingly straightforward. 20% equity, no operational control, reasonable performance expectations. Everything was legitimate, which only made me more paranoid about what I was missing. Rain lashed against the tall windows as I reviewed contractor estimates by the glow of a single desk lamp. The space was mostly empty still, with only temporary furniture while I finalized design plans. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. "Still at the office? Look outside." I moved to the window and spotted a black car idling at the curb below. Another text followed. "Working dinner? I have updates on the tech integration for your virtual tours." I hesitated. Every meeting with Theo until now had been during business hours, in proper settings with clear agendas. Evening meetings felt like crossing a boundary I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. But the tech integration for virtual property tours was a crucial component of my business plan, and his expertise was invaluable. "Give me 5 minutes," I texted back. We ended up at a small, upscale restaurant tucked away in a brownstone on a quiet street, the kind of place with no sign outside and no menu inside, just a chef who created whatever inspired him that evening. The maitre d' greeted Theo by name, leading us to a secluded table near the fireplace. "You come here often?" I asked, settling into the leather chair. "When I need quiet conversation without smartphones documenting every bite." He gestured around the intimate space. They have a strict no photography policy and excellent discretion. I raised an eyebrow. Is our business relationship worthy of paparazzi now? My business dealings are always of interest to certain parties, he said, accepting a glass of wine from the server. More so lately. He seemed tense, his usual composed demeanor slightly frayed at the edges. I realized I'd never seen him like this before. Is everything all right? With Quantum Sphere, I mean? Theo considered me for a moment, as if weighing how much to share. The corporate espionage allegations last year were more complicated than the press reported. The situation isn't fully resolved. Hence the private restaurant and careful movements, I observed. Hence my general reclusiveness these days, he corrected. But we're not here to discuss my corporate politics. Tell me about the contractors. For the next hour, we talked business, renovation timelines, technology integration, marketing strategies. Theo's insights were consistently helpful, his questions pushing me to refine my plans without trying to override my decisions. As dessert arrived, the conversation shifted. Why real estate? He asked. With your analytical skills and market understanding, you could excel in any number of industries. The question caught me off guard. Few people asked about my motivations, only my qualifications. I grew up in a small apartment in Atlanta, I said, surprised by my willingness to share. My mother worked 3 jobs after my father left. But she always cut out magazine pictures of beautiful homes, creating vision boards of places we'd live someday. I traced the rim of my wine glass, remembering. She never got her dream house. Cancer took her the year I graduated college. But I discovered I had a knack for helping others find their dream homes, for understanding what spaces would transform their lives. Theo listened intently, his eyes never leaving my face. And Atlanta? Why leave? I tensed slightly. Professional setback. I needed a fresh start. He nodded, not pressing further. Chicago was lucky to get you. The simple compliment warmed me more than it should have. What about you? I asked, turning the tables. Why technology? Control, he answered immediately. The elegance of systems that follow logical rules. Code doesn't lie or betray or disappoint. It simply executes what you've written, for better or worse. There was something wounded beneath his words that resonated with me. We both valued control because we'd experienced its absence in painful ways. The corporate espionage allegations, I ventured carefully, were they related to the prototype in your suitcase? His expression closed slightly. You noticed that? Hard to miss a specialized case with 3 different locks. He studied me for a long moment before answering. Yes, it's quantum encryption technology, potentially revolutionary for data security. Someone inside my company attempted to sell the specs to competitors last year. Did they succeed? Not entirely, but enough to create complications. He sighed, fatigue evident in the gesture. Trust is a luxury in my industry. In any industry, I murmured, thinking of Ethan. Something shifted between us in that moment, a recognition of shared wounds. For the first time since Atlanta, I felt understood by someone who hadn't lived through it with me. When Theo drove me home later, rain still falling in sheets across the windshield, the silence between us felt comfortable rather than awkward. Thank you for dinner, I said as his car pulled up to my building. Thank you for the company, he replied. It's refreshing to have conversations that don't revolve around shareholder value or market capitalization. I gathered my purse, hesitating before opening the door. The tech integration plans you showed me tonight will make a real difference for Apex. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate your vision, Olivia. It's rare and valuable. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. Instead, he simply smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. Good night, I said quickly, stepping out into the rain before I could do something foolish like invite him up. As I watched his car drive away, I acknowledged the inconvenient truth I'd been avoiding for weeks. My interest in Theo Miller had expanded well beyond his potential as an investor, and judging by the way he'd looked at me tonight, the feeling might be mutual. That realization should have sent me running in the opposite direction. Instead, I found myself smiling as I entered my building, already looking forward to our next meeting with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business plans or property listings. I woke to an insistent buzzing from my phone. 6 missed calls from Zoe and a stream of text messages, the last one reading simply, "Call me now, it's bad." Blinking sleep from my eyes, I dialed her number. She answered immediately. "Have you seen it?" "Seen what?" I asked, still groggy. "The photos. Check your email now, Liv." Something in her voice sent a chill through me. I opened my laptop and found Zoe's email with a link to a gossip blog called Chicago Insider. The headline blared, "Tech Billionaires Midnight Meeting, Business or Pleasure." Below were photos of Theo and me leaving the restaurant last night, standing close under an umbrella in the rain. Another showed us in his car, the angle making our conversation appear far more intimate than it had been. The caption suggested I was the latest in a string of ambitious women using personal connections to secure Theo Miller's financial backing. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the comments, many speculating about exactly what services I was providing to earn his investment. "This is a disaster," I whispered, scrolling further to find links to my professional profile and newly formed company website. "It gets worse," Zoe said grimly. "Crawford Investment Group called this morning. They're pulling out of your secondary funding round, citing concerns about the company's professional reputation." Crawford had been my backup funding source, the safety net if things with Theo didn't work out. Their withdrawal left me dangerously dependent on his investment alone. "This can't be happening again," I whispered. "Again?" Zoe asked sharply. I hadn't told her the full story about Atlanta, about how Ethan had systematically destroyed my professional reputation after stealing my business model. Some humiliations were too painful to share, even with friends. "Nothing. Listen, I need to handle this. I'll call you back." I hung up and immediately tried Theo's number, straight to voicemail. I sent a text. "Have you seen the blog post? We need to talk." 3 agonizing hours passed before he responded. "In meetings all day. My PR team is monitoring the situation. Try not to worry. Try not to worry." My fledgling business was being characterized as a front for a personal relationship, my professional credibility evaporating with every share and comment. And Theo's response was to delegate it to his PR team. I showered and dressed in my most severe business attire: charcoal pencil skirt, crisp white blouse, black blazer, power armor.
At the office, I found a courier package waiting. My investment check from Crawford, returned without explanation beyond a terse note about changing investment priorities. By noon, 2 potential clients had canceled showings. By 2 o'clock, my phone was ringing with calls from industry acquaintances, offering concerned support that felt more like voyeuristic curiosity. "I heard about the blog post," they'd say. "Are you okay? Is it true about you and Theo Miller?" Each time, I gave the same tight response. "Mr. Miller is an investor in Apex Luxury Properties. Our relationship is strictly professional." But the damage was spreading. By late afternoon, industry chat groups were buzzing with speculation about how I'd secured prime Marshall building space at below-market rates. I was staring grimly at my computer, tracking the online fallout, when a text message from an unfamiliar number appeared. "Karma's fascinating, isn't it, Liv?" Chicago wasn't far enough to run. The blood drained from my face. Only one person called me Liv with that particular condescending tone. Ethan was in Chicago. Somehow he was connected to this. Before I could process this revelation, my office door opened. Theo walked in, his expression grave. "We need to talk." "Now you have time?" I snapped, anger overriding my usual composure. "After my business reputation has been shredded online? After my backup investors pulled out?" He raised an eyebrow. "You had backup investors?" "Of course I did. I don't stake my entire future on one connection, no matter how promising." I pushed the return check across my desk. Crawford Investment Group. They were my safety net. Theo picked up the check, frowning. "Victor Chambers is on their board." "Who?" "My chief competitor. The man who benefited most from last year's corporate espionage attempt. He set the check down carefully. This isn't a coincidence, Olivia. You think your corporate rivalry is behind a gossip blog trashing my reputation? I shook my head in disbelief. Not everything revolves around you, Theo. The timing is suspicious. The photos were clearly planned. Someone followed us. He paced the length of my office. And Crawford pulling out immediately afterward. Victor's fingerprints are all over this. I pulled out my phone, showing him the text message. Well, someone else might be involved too. My ex from Atlanta is apparently in Chicago. Theo read the message, his expression darkening. The professional setback you mentioned. It involved him. I swallowed hard, the humiliation still fresh years later. Ethan Calloway. We were colleagues, then partners, both professionally and personally. I shared my business plans for an independent agency with him. He used my strategies, then systematically undermined my reputation with clients and lenders, claiming I was using our relationship to advance my career. The irony was bitter on my tongue. Sound familiar? By the time I realized what was happening, my professional reputation in Atlanta was destroyed. I had to move to Chicago and start over. Understanding dawned in Theo's eyes. That's why you were so hesitant about my investment offer, and why I keep insisting on strictly professional interactions, I added pointedly. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I respect that boundary. Last night was a business dinner, nothing more. Tell that to Chicago Insider and their readers, I said bitterly. I've worked too hard rebuilding my career to have history repeat itself. It won't, Theo said with sudden determination. We'll fix this. But as he began outlining damage control strategies, I felt a familiar despair creeping in. Once rumors start, they develop their own momentum. I'd learned that lesson in Atlanta, watching helplessly as colleagues and clients distanced themselves from me, one by one. I'd sworn never to be that vulnerable again, yet here I was, watching my carefully constructed new life beginning to crumble. All because I'd let my guard down enough to have dinner with Theo Miller. The days following the blog post were a slow-motion nightmare. I threw myself into work, stubbornly proceeding with office renovations and client outreach, as if sheer determination could overcome the whispers following me through Chicago's luxury real estate community. Professional relationships I'd spent years cultivating suddenly cooled. People who had eagerly taken my calls now had their assistants respond with vague excuses. 2 more potential clients canceled listings, one explicitly mentioning concerns about recent publicity. The worst part was knowing this playbook intimately. I'd lived it before in Atlanta, watching my hard-earned reputation dissolve amid innuendo and gossip. Only this time, the stakes were higher. I'd invested everything in Apex. My savings, my future, my identity. I maintained a strictly professional relationship with Theo through it all, communicating primarily through email, limiting our in-person meetings to necessary business discussions with Zoe present as a buffer. He seemed to understand my need for distance, respecting the boundaries I established without question. But with each passing day, my resolve weakened. After a particularly difficult meeting where a developer questioned my relationship with Theo 3 separate times, I found myself driving to Lake Michigan instead of home. The early evening air was crisp as I walked along the shore, trying to quiet my racing thoughts. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. Checking in. How are you holding up? I stared at the message, debating whether to respond with my usual professional deflection or with the truth. After a moment, I typed, "Not well." At the lake trying to clear my head, his reply came quickly. "Which part?" "I can meet you if you want company." The smart move was to decline, to maintain the careful distance that might eventually convince people our connection was purely professional. Instead, I sent him my location. 20 minutes later, he appeared, wearing jeans and a simple black sweater rather than his usual suit. The casual attire humanized him somehow, making him seem less like the tech billionaire from magazine covers, and more like someone I might have met under ordinary circumstances. "Thank you for coming," I said as he sat beside me on the bench overlooking the water. "Of course." He handed me a coffee cup. "I thought you might be cold." The small kindness nearly undid me. I accepted the cup, grateful for its warmth between my palms. "Everything's falling apart, Theo, just like in Atlanta." "It's not the same situation," he said quietly. "You're not alone this time." "Maybe I should be. Your involvement is what's causing the problem." He was silent for a moment. "Do you want me to withdraw my investment?" The question startled me. "What?" "If my connection to Apex is damaging your business, I can step away. I'll convert the investment to a regular loan with favorable terms. No equity, no involvement. Your company, free and clear." The offer was incredibly generous and exactly what I should have wanted. Instead, it felt like another loss. "You'd do that?" "If it would help you, yes." His gaze remained on the horizon, though I'd prefer to find another solution. "Why?" I asked, turning to study his profile. "Why do you care about my agency succeeding? It's such a small investment for someone like you." He considered the question carefully before answering. "When I found your business plan in that suitcase, what struck me wasn't just the market analysis or financial projections. It was the passion behind them, the vision for something built with integrity." He turned to face me. "That's rare, Olivia. Most people in business are looking for angles, advantages, ways to exploit systems or people. You genuinely want to create something excellent that serves clients well." His words resonated with a truth I felt but rarely articulated. "I do. So do I in my field. That's what connected me to your plan immediately. I recognized a kindred spirit." His smile was rueful. "Also, my mother was a real estate agent in Cleveland. Single mom, worked incredibly hard. She never got the chance to open her own agency." This personal revelation surprised me. Theo rarely volunteered information about his past. "You never mentioned that before." "It wasn't relevant to our business discussions." He shrugged slightly. "But it might be relevant to understanding why I feel personally invested in your success." We sat in companionable silence, watching waves lap against the shore as dusk settled over the lake. The distance I'd so carefully maintained between us seemed to dissolve with each passing minute. "I received another text from Ethan today," I admitted finally. "He's taken a position with Prestige Properties here in Chicago." "Your competitor?" "One of the largest luxury agencies in the city." I wrapped my arms around myself. "It's happening again, Theo. He's positioning himself to benefit from my downfall." Theo's expression hardened. "Not this time." Something in his tone made me look at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means we fight back, strategically." He turned toward me. "Your ex and my competitor are coordinating their attacks. We need to coordinate our defense." "How?" "I have resources Ethan Calloway can't imagine, and you have more allies than you realize." He hesitated, then added, "But it means working closely together. If that's too complicated given the current rumors, I understand." The sensible answer was to maintain distance, to handle Ethan my way while Theo dealt with his corporate rivals separately. But something had shifted between us on that bench by the lake, a trust forming that went beyond business partnership. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "First, we find out exactly how they're connected and what they're planning. Then we turn the tables." His eyes met mine, determination clear in their depths. "If you'll trust me." The word hung between us, weighted with my history of betrayal and his invitation to believe in something different this time. "I want to," I whispered, more vulnerable than I'd allowed myself to be in years. "But I've been wrong before." "So have I." He reached out, his hand stopping just short of mine on the bench between us. Maybe we can be right together. I looked at his offered hand, remembering all the reasons I should maintain professional distance. Then I placed my palm against his, accepting whatever came next. Let's find out. The following morning, I arrived at Theo's office in the Quantum Sphere Technologies headquarters. Unlike the sleek, ultra-modern exteriors of most tech companies, his building maintained the historical facade of the former printing press it had once been, with thoroughly modern interiors. It matched his philosophy of blending innovation with substance, something I'd come to appreciate about him. His assistant escorted me to a conference room where Theo waited with a man he introduced as Miles Bennett, head of corporate security for Quantum Sphere. Miles specializes in digital forensics and counterintelligence, Theo explained. He's been investigating the corporate espionage attempt from last year. Miles nodded professionally. Mr. Miller asked me to look into the blog post situation and possible connections to Victor Chambers. What I found is concerning. He opened a laptop and displayed a series of slides. The photos on Chicago Insider were taken by a freelance photographer who frequently sells to gossip sites. However, his metadata shows the photos were commissioned specifically, not taken opportunistically. "Someone hired him to follow us," I said, the violation making my skin crawl. "Correct. And when I traced the payment, it came through 3 shell companies before landing at Tribune Media Holdings." Theo's expression darkened. "Victor's private investment firm." "That proves the connection to your rival," I observed. "But what about Ethan? How does he fit in?" Miles clicked to another slide showing email correspondence. "Mr. Calloway was hired by Prestige Properties 3 weeks ago, shortly after attending a real estate technology conference where Victor Chambers was the keynote speaker." 3 weeks ago, I repeated. "That's before the blog post, before Theo and I even had dinner." "It gets more interesting," Miles continued. "Mr. Calloway's employment contract has an unusual clause, a substantial bonus structure tied to Prestige's acquisition of certain competitive targets in the Chicago market." I felt a chill. "They're planning to force me to sell Apex to Prestige, with Ethan leading the acquisition." "Which would simultaneously damage me," Theo added. "Having my high-profile investment fail publicly would reinforce the narrative that I've lost my business acumen after last year's troubles." The elaborate scheme stunned me. "All this because of a random luggage mix-up?" "I don't think it was random," Theo said quietly. "When did you return from New York?" 3 weeks ago, I realized, the timing suddenly suspicious. "You think someone deliberately switched our bags?" "I think someone saw an opportunity when they realized we'd be on the same flight. The perfect way to engineer a meeting between us." Miles nodded. "Creating a connection they could later exploit. They didn't anticipate that Mr. Miller would actually invest in your company, but they adapted their strategy when he did." The manipulation infuriated me. My chance meeting with Theo, my business opportunity, even our tentative personal connection, all part of someone else's scheme? "So what do we do now?" I demanded. "We have 2 options," Theo said. "We can expose what we know immediately, or we can gather more evidence while appearing to play into their hands." "The second approach carries more risk," Miles cautioned, "but potentially greater reward. If we can document their entire conspiracy, the damage to them would be substantial." I thought of Ethan's smug text message, of the clients who'd abandoned me based on rumors, of the years I'd spent rebuilding after Atlanta. I want to fight back, I decided, not just defend myself, but make sure they can't do this to anyone else. Theo studied me for a moment before nodding. "Then we need to make them believe they're winning while we build our case." For the next several hours, we crafted a counter-strategy. I would appear increasingly desperate as Apex's business suffered, while Theo would publicly distance himself, citing concerns about the company's direction. We'd create the perception of a business relationship falling apart, making Apex seem vulnerable to acquisition. Meanwhile, Miles would document every connection between Victor, Ethan, and their orchestrated attacks. We'd record every interaction, track every communication, building an airtight case of corporate sabotage and defamation. When I left Quantum Sphere that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. For the first time since Atlanta, I wasn't facing enemies alone. As I waited for the elevator, Theo joined me in the hallway. "You were impressive in there," he said quietly. "Most people would be devastated by what we learned." "I am devastated," I admitted, "but I'm also angry. They're not just attacking my business. They're manipulating my life, my relationships." The elevator arrived, but Theo put his hand out to stop the doors from closing. "About that, I want to be clear about something." My heart beat faster at his serious tone. "What's that?" "Whatever they intended by engineering our meeting, what's developed between us is real, at least on my side." His eyes held mine steadily. "I need you to know that." The confession hung between us, vulnerable and honest. For weeks, I'd been fighting my growing feelings for Theo, convincing myself they were inappropriate or dangerous given our business relationship. Now I faced a different question. Were those feelings genuine or part of someone else's manipulation? I thought about our conversations, the way he'd respected my boundaries, his offer to withdraw his investment if it would help me. None of that fit the pattern of exploitation I'd experienced with Ethan. "I believe you," I said finally, "and for what it's worth, it's real on my side too, which terrifies me more than Victor and Ethan combined." A smile touched his lips. "We'll figure it out, one battle at a time." The elevator doors tried to close again, and this time he let them. As I descended to the lobby, I felt strangely lighter despite the conspiracy we'd uncovered. Someone had deliberately thrown us together, thinking we'd destroy each other. Instead, they might have given me exactly what I'd been afraid to seek: a partner I could actually trust. That evening, I received an email from an anonymous account. Inside was a detailed financial report showing Ethan had embezzled funds from his former Atlanta employer, the real reason for his abrupt career change. With it was a simple message: "Thought you might find this useful. Not everyone believes the rumors." I stared at the evidence that could have saved my reputation years ago, wondering who had sent it. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone else was watching our enemies, and for now at least, they seemed to be on our side. For 2 weeks, Theo and I maintained careful public distance while privately building our case. I forwarded the anonymous email with Ethan's embezzlement evidence to Miles, who confirmed its authenticity and added it to our growing file. Each day brought new developments as we executed our counterplan. The hardest part was playing the role of a failing business owner. I deliberately kept the Apex office looking unfinished, postponed hiring support staff, and allowed rumors of cash flow problems to circulate. Meanwhile, Theo gave a carefully worded interview to a business publication expressing reconsideration of certain recent investments, without naming Apex specifically. The story was immediately picked up by other outlets, including Chicago Insider, which ran a gleeful piece about our business breakup. Zoe was the only person I confided in about our strategy. "This is either brilliantly strategic or completely insane," she declared when I explained the plan. "Possibly both." "It has to look convincing," I insisted. "Ethan knows me. He'll be suspicious if I give up too easily." "Speaking of your ex from hell, I saw him yesterday at the Richardsons' property showing. He made a point of mentioning how sorry he was to hear about your setbacks with Apex." My hands tightened around my coffee cup. "Did he approach any of your clients?" "Tried to with the Wilsons. I shut that down immediately." Zoe's loyalty was unwavering, one of the few bright spots in this challenging time. But he's making rounds with other agents' clients, positioning Prestige as a more stable option than independent agencies. It was exactly what we expected, yet the confirmation still stung. Let him think it's working. The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make. By the end of the second week, our strategy began bearing fruit. Victor Chambers reached out to Theo directly, suggesting a private discussion about mutual interests. Meanwhile, Prestige Properties, through Ethan, made a lowball offer to acquire Apex, citing my current difficulties as justification for the insulting price. I arrived at Theo's condo that evening to discuss next steps. He'd insisted we meet somewhere more private than either of our offices, given the sensitive nature of our planning. His security team had swept the space for surveillance devices, making it one of the few places we could speak freely. His home surprised me. I'd expected contemporary minimalism, all glass and steel, but instead found warm woods, comfortable furniture, and walls lined with actual physical books. It felt lived in and personal in a way that contradicted his public image. "Nice place," I commented, accepting the glass of wine he offered. Not what I expected. "What did you expect?" He seemed genuinely curious. "Something out of Architectural Digest, aggressively modern, aesthetically perfect, emotionally sterile." He laughed, the sound warming something inside me. I spend enough time in sleek, technological environments at work. Home should feel like home. We settled in his living room, documents spread across the coffee table between us. "Victor wants to meet next Tuesday," Theo explained. "I've agreed, with conditions that should make him feel secure enough to speak freely. And I've told Ethan I'm considering Prestige's offer but need time to review the terms," I added. "He's planning to come to the office tomorrow to discuss details. Miles will ensure both conversations are recorded." Theo leaned forward, his expression serious. "But there's something else we need to discuss. The anonymous email you received with the embezzlement evidence. Have you figured out who sent it?" "Not definitively, but Miles traced it to a server inside Quantum Sphere." I blinked in surprise. "Someone at your company is helping us? Or setting us up?" His expression was grave. "Not everyone at Quantum Sphere is loyal to me after last year's troubles. Victor has contacts throughout the tech industry." The implication was clear. We might be walking into a trap rather than springing one of our own. The uncertainty brought all my defensive instincts rushing back. Was I making the same mistake again, trusting too easily? I set my wine glass down carefully. Maybe we should reconsider this plan. If they're anticipating our moves, we could be making things worse. Or maybe someone genuinely wants to help. Theo moved from his chair to sit beside me on the sofa. "Not everyone is Ethan Calloway, Olivia." The echo of Zoe's earlier words wasn't lost on me. "But not everyone is trustworthy either." "No." His gaze held mine. "But at some point we have to decide who deserves our trust." The moment stretched between us, loaded with implications beyond our business strategy. For weeks we'd been developing two parallel connections: the professional partnership visible to the world, and something more personal that existed in private conversations and shared glances. "I want to trust you," I admitted finally, "but every time I start to let my guard down, something happens that makes me question everything. First the blog post, then discovering our meeting wasn't even coincidental. Now this mysterious helper who might actually be setting us up." "I know." He reached for my hand, his touch sending warmth up my arm. "But consider this. If someone engineered our meeting hoping we'd destroy each other, they've failed spectacularly. Instead, we've formed a partnership neither of us expected." His words resonated with the thoughts I'd been afraid to voice. Whatever forces had thrown us together, the connection that developed was real, complicated and unexpected, but genuine. "So we proceed as planned?" I asked. "Yes, but more cautiously. Miles will implement additional security protocols, and we'll have backup plans ready." We spent the next 2 hours refining our strategy, preparing for every contingency we could imagine. As the evening grew late, our conversation drifted from tactical planning to more personal territory. His childhood in Cleveland with his real estate agent mother, my years rebuilding in Chicago after Atlanta, the parallel paths that had somehow converged in an airport luggage mix-up. When I finally rose to leave, something had shifted between us. The walls I'd maintained since Atlanta had developed hairline fractures, vulnerability seeping through despite my best efforts. At the door, Theo caught my hand. "Whatever happens with Victor and Ethan, I want you to know something." I turned back to him. "What's that?" "Finding your suitcase was the best mistake I ever made." The simple sincerity in his voice undid my final defenses. I stepped closer, decision made, and kissed him. A gesture that acknowledged what we'd both been circling for weeks. When we parted, I saw my own complicated emotions reflected in his eyes. Fear, hope, determination, and something else neither of us was quite ready to name. "Tomorrow we face our enemies," I said quietly. "But tonight I'm glad we found each other, even if someone else orchestrated the introduction." His smile was genuine as he touched my cheek. Their biggest miscalculation was thinking we'd be enemies rather than allies. Or something more than allies, I added before turning to leave. The Chicago Business Leadership Gala transformed the Art Institute's grand hall into a glittering showcase of power and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors, where the city's elite gathered in formal attire, networking with practiced smiles and calculated conversations. Normally, I would have been intimidated by such an event, but tonight I walked in with purpose, Theo at my side. "You look beautiful," he murmured as we paused at the entrance. I'd chosen a deep emerald gown that contrasted with my skin, sophisticated yet striking. Theo was impeccable in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his usually serious expression softened when he looked at me. "Remember the plan," I reminded him quietly. "Public reconciliation, then separate to draw them out individually." He nodded, his hand warm against the small of my back as we entered. Heads turned immediately, whispers following in our wake. For weeks, Chicago's business community had watched the apparent disintegration of our professional relationship. Our joint appearance tonight was designed to catch our adversaries off guard. We'd spent the previous days gathering final evidence. Ethan had visited my office, revealing more than he intended about Prestige's plans to absorb struggling independent agencies across Chicago, with Apex as the first target. Meanwhile, Theo's meeting with Victor had yielded damning recordings of him discussing their coordinated campaign against both Quantum Sphere and me. The pieces were in place. Tonight, we would spring the trap. Across the room, I spotted Ethan holding court with a group of real estate developers. His smile faltered momentarily when he saw me with Theo. Similarly, Victor Chambers stood near the bar, his expression darkening as he registered our arrival. "They've noticed us," I whispered. "Now we make them nervous." We circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations on Apex's newly announced expansion, a fabrication we'd leaked to select industry contacts, knowing it would reach our targets. The confusion on their faces confirmed they'd believed our staged business troubles were real. After 30 minutes of strategic visibility, Theo squeezed my hand. "I see the mayor arriving. Perfect timing for Phase 2. He moved toward the entrance while I drifted toward the bar, intentionally positioning myself where Ethan could approach without Theo nearby. I didn't wait long. "Olivia James." His voice came from behind me, familiar in its practiced charm. "Quite a recovery your little agency seems to be making." I turned, facing the man who had once broken both my heart and my career. Time had added touches of gray at his temples, but hadn't changed the calculating look in his eyes. "Ethan, I was wondering if you'd have the nerve to approach me directly." He laughed as if I'd made a charming joke rather than an accusation. "Always so dramatic, Liv. I'm simply offering professional courtesy. Colleagues should maintain civility, even when they compete." "Is that what we're doing? Competing? I thought you were trying to destroy my business through coordinated defamation." His smile never wavered, though something hardened in his eyes. "Interesting theory. Your new boyfriend must be filling your head with tech industry paranoia." "Not my boyfriend, my business partner." I sipped my champagne. And we've developed quite an interesting file documenting your activities since arriving in Chicago, including your arrangement with Victor Chambers. The slight tightening around his mouth told me the shot had landed. You always did have an active imagination, and you always underestimated me. I gestured toward where Theo stood talking with the mayor and Victor. Right now, Theo is informing Victor that we have recordings of your conversations discussing the plan to discredit both of us. Victor, being the experienced businessman he is, will immediately realize the legal implications. On cue, Victor's face across the room transformed from polite engagement to barely concealed anger as Theo continued speaking with calm intensity. "What recordings?" Ethan demanded, his composure cracking. "The ones where you discuss the original luggage switch at O'Hare. The ones where you outline how Prestige will acquire Apex after your smear campaign devalues it. The ones where Victor promises you a percentage of Quantum Sphere stock after their hostile takeover attempt." Each revelation hit like a physical blow. I watched the realization spread across his face. He'd been caught, thoroughly and irrefutably. "You're bluffing," he managed finally. I reached into my clutch and removed a small flash drive. "Financial records proving you embezzled from your Atlanta firm. Records of payments from Victor's shell companies to the photographer who stalked us. Email correspondence between you both planning this entire scheme." His face went pale. "You can't prove any connection to me." "We already have. And copies of this evidence will be delivered to the Chicago Real Estate Board, Prestige's Board of Directors, and appropriate law enforcement agencies in the morning." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Unless you and Victor make a very different kind of deal tonight." Across the room, I saw Victor storming toward the exit, Theo following at a measured pace. Everything was proceeding according to plan. "What kind of deal?" Ethan asked, desperation edging his voice. "Full written confessions from both of you, your immediate resignation from Prestige, Victor's public statement clearing Theo of last year's corporate espionage allegations." I smiled coldly. "And your permanent departure from Chicago's real estate market." "You can't force that. Watch me." I maintained steady eye contact. "I'm not the same woman you manipulated in Atlanta, Ethan. I learned from that experience. I built safeguards, and I found allies who value integrity over exploitation." My phone buzzed with a text from Theo. Victor agreeing to terms, meeting us in private dining room. I showed Ethan the message. "Last chance. Join Victor in damage control, or face the consequences alone." The crowd around us continued their glittering conversations, oblivious to the power shift occurring in their midst. Ethan's confident facade had completely crumbled, revealing the desperate opportunist beneath. "You've changed, Liv," he said finally. "I've grown." I gestured toward the hallway leading to the private dining rooms. Decision time. As I guided him toward the confrontation that would finally end the threats against both Theo and me, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The shame and helplessness I'd carried since Atlanta lifted with each step. This time I wasn't running away to start over. This time I was standing my ground and reclaiming my narrative. In the private dining room, Victor and Theo sat at opposite ends of a long table, Miles standing guard at the door. When Ethan and I entered, Victor looked up with defeated rage. "Your Apex partner has quite thoroughly outmaneuvered us," he said to Ethan. "Perhaps you should have researched Ms. James more carefully before suggesting her as a target." 6 months later, I stood in the completed lobby of Apex Luxury Properties, admiring how perfectly the space embodied my vision. The historic details of the Marshall Building had been meticulously preserved, ornate crown molding, marble floors, brass fixtures, while modern elements like the glass reception desk and digital property displays added contemporary functionality. The grand opening celebration would begin in an hour. Already, floral arrangements filled the space with subtle fragrance, and catering staff prepared champagne and hors d'oeuvres for the city's real estate elite who would soon arrive. "Everything looks perfect," Zoe declared, joining me in the lobby. As my first official hire and now operations director, she'd been instrumental in bringing Apex from concept to reality. The Chicago Tribune photographer is set up in the conference room for the feature interview. "And the team knows the property portfolio inside out," I confirmed, "rehearsed and ready. We've already had 3 calls this morning from potential clients who saw the advance publicity." She straightened my lapel with sisterly affection. "We're going to crush this, Liv." The aftermath of the gala confrontation had unfolded better than we'd dared hope. Victor and Ethan, faced with overwhelming evidence, had signed the agreements we'd prepared. Victor publicly cleared Theo of the corporate espionage allegations, claiming new evidence had revealed the actual culprit. Ethan resigned from Prestige Properties the following day, quietly leaving Chicago altogether. With our names cleared, both our businesses flourished. Quantum Sphere's stock rebounded, and Apex secured a roster of prestigious clients who appreciated our unique approach to luxury properties. The bell above the door chimed as Theo entered, looking relaxed and confident in a way he hadn't when we first met. The reclusive tech genius was gradually returning to public life, though selectively. Tonight he would make a rare appearance as my official business partner. "The press is already gathering outside," he reported, crossing to join us. 2 more media outlets than we expected. I smiled. "Your presence might have something to do with that. Or perhaps they're interested in Chicago's fastest-growing luxury real estate agency." His eyes held mine with quiet pride. "You've accomplished something remarkable here, Olivia." Before I could respond, my assistant approached with an elegantly wrapped package. "This just arrived for you, Ms. James." I unwrapped it carefully, finding a custom-made frame containing the luggage tag from Theo's suitcase, the plain black one I'd mistakenly grabbed that night at O'Hare. Beside it was a handwritten note. "Sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destination. I thought you might want this for your new office," Theo explained, a reminder of how this all began. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. "It's perfect." As Zoe discreetly moved away to direct the final preparations, Theo took my hand. "We have a few minutes before guests arrive. Walk with me?" We slipped into my private office where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Chicago's skyline. The room reflected my personality, elegant yet practical, with subtle touches of luxury in the materials and finishes. "I have something else for you," Theo said, withdrawing a small box from his pocket. "Something not for display." Inside was a set of keys on a custom leather fob embossed with both our initials. "What are these for?" I asked. "My lake house in Michigan. I thought perhaps this weekend when the opening festivities are done you might want to get away. With me." There was a hint of vulnerability in his expression I rarely saw. "Somewhere private, where we can just be ourselves without strategy or performance." Over the months since confronting our enemies, our relationship had evolved carefully, deliberately. We'd given ourselves permission to explore the connection that had developed alongside our business partnership, but always mindful of maintaining appropriate boundaries in professional settings. "I'd like that," I said softly. He smiled, touching my cheek with gentle fingers. "When I found your business plan in that suitcase, I never imagined where it would lead. When I read your journal, I never thought I'd trust a powerful man again," I admitted. "You proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong in the best possible ways." He glanced at his watch. "Your guests will arrive soon, ready to make your official debut as the owner of Apex." I took a deep breath, thinking about the journey that had brought me here, from the devastating betrayal in Atlanta to the luggage mix-up that changed everything, to standing now in the realization of my dream. "More than ready," I assured him, straightening my shoulders. As we returned to the lobby, now filling with staff preparing to greet our guests, I paused by the custom frame Theo had given me. The simple luggage tag represented how quickly life could change direction, how what seemed like a mistake could become the pivot point for something extraordinary. Behind the reception desk hung the framed core values of Apex Luxury Properties: integrity, excellence, vision, words that had guided me through rebuilding after Atlanta, through fighting back against Ethan and Victor, through creating this new beginning. They were also the qualities I'd found in Theo, not the tech billionaire from magazine covers, but the man who had become my partner in every sense that mattered. The doors opened as the first guests arrived, Chicago's business elite entering with curious eyes and congratulatory smiles. I stepped forward to welcome them, Theo slightly behind me, supporting without overshadowing. This was my moment, my achievement, the culmination of years of determination and resilience. Yet as I welcomed Chicago's elite to the grand opening of Apex Luxury Properties, I knew the most valuable thing I'd gained wasn't the successful business or professional vindication. It was the discovery that sometimes the things that seem to derail our carefully planned journeys are actually redirecting us toward precisely where we need to be. A switched suitcase, a chance meeting, a partnership born of circumstance that evolved into something neither of us had been looking for, but both of us needed. As I caught Theo's eye across the increasingly crowded lobby, his quiet smile meant only for me, I silently thanked whatever twist of fate had caused me to grab the wrong luggage that night at O'Hare and changed the trajectory of both our lives forever.